I've never been the type of person who scares easily. I grew up camping, hiking, and spending weekends outdoors with my family. Being alone in the woods never bothered me, at least, not until this happened. A few years ago, three friends and I decided to spend a weekend in a state forest in Oregon. The plan was simple: hike a few miles to a remote campsite, stay overnight, and head back the next day. Everything went according to plan until sunset. We had reached the campsite later than expected because one of our friends twisted his ankle halfway through the hike. It wasn't serious, but it slowed us down enough that darkness arrived while we were still setting up camp. Around 9 o'clock, we were sitting around the fire when I realized I had left my backpack near a stream about 15 minutes away. Inside the backpack were my car keys and my wallet. I didn't want to leave them there overnight. My friends offered to come with me, but I told them not to bother. I had a flashlight. I knew the path, and the stream wasn't far away. That decision still bothers me. The walk started normally. The trail was narrow but easy to follow. My flashlight illuminated the dirt path ahead, and I could still see the reflective trail markers attached to nearby trees. After about 10 minutes, I reached the stream. My backpack was exactly where I had left it. I grabbed it and turned around. That's when I heard a phone ringing. At first, I thought it was mine, but the sound wasn't coming from my pocket. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the woods. I stopped. The ringing continued. A few seconds later, it stopped. Then it started again. The sound seemed strangely close, maybe 15 yards away. I remember thinking how weird it was that someone would lose a phone out there. I walked toward the sound. Looking back, that was my biggest mistake. The ringing would stop whenever I got close, then start again from farther away. I followed it several times before finally realizing I was no longer on the trail. I turned around. The path was gone, completely gone. Trees surrounded me in every direction. No markers, no stream, nothing familiar. A knot formed in my stomach. I pulled out my phone. No signal. 1% battery. I tried using the flashlight on the screen to orient myself, but it wasn't enough. Then my phone died. Just like that. The forest became completely dark. I still had my flashlight, but suddenly the darkness felt different. Heavier. Like the beam wasn't reaching as far as it should. I started walking in what I thought was the direction of camp. After 15 minutes, I heard the phone ringing again. The exact same ringtone. Somewhere ahead. This time I ignored it. I kept moving. The ringing continued. Then something happened that made my blood run cold. The ringtone stopped, and a voice came through the darkness. A man's voice, calm and clear. "Hello?" I froze. The voice sounded like it was speaking through a phone speaker. "Hello? Can somebody hear me?" The sound echoed through the trees. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, the voice spoke again. "Ethan?" Every muscle in my body locked up. I hadn't told anyone where I was. The voice repeated it, a little louder this time. "Ethan." Then silence. I started walking faster. Soon I was practically running. Branches scraped against my jacket as I pushed through the darkness. Every few minutes I thought I heard movement behind me. Footsteps, not matching my pace. Following it, deliberately. Whenever I stopped, the sound stopped too. Around midnight, I found an old service road. I nearly cried with relief. At least it was something recognizable. I followed it for what felt like an hour. Then I noticed a light ahead, a flashlight. Someone was walking toward me. I shouted for help. The light immediately stopped moving. I shouted again. No response. The figure remained motionless, too far away to identify. Just a silhouette holding a light. I began walking toward it. The figure turned around and started walking away. Slowly, almost inviting me to follow. I kept shouting. Still no response. The distance between us never changed. No matter how long I walked, the figure remained the same distance ahead. Eventually, I stopped. The figure stopped too. For nearly a minute, we stood there, neither moving. Then the figure switched off the flashlight. The darkness swallowed everything. I never saw it again. A few hours later, just before sunrise, I finally heard people calling my name. Real voices. My friends and a group of park rangers had been searching all night. They found me nearly 6 miles from the campsite. The strange thing was that I wasn't anywhere near the direction I had been walking. According to the rangers, I had somehow crossed rough terrain, dense forest, and a steep ravine without any injuries. They couldn't understand how I got there. Neither could I. Back at camp, I told my friends about the voice, about the ringing phone, about hearing the name. Nobody laughed. Because while I had been missing, something happened at the campsite. Around the same time I disappeared, my friends claimed they heard someone outside the circle of firelight. A man's voice, calling the name Ethan from the woods. They assumed it was me, until they realized the voice was coming from the wrong direction, far away from the trail I had taken. Years have passed since then. I've never returned to that forest. But every once in a while, usually late at night, I receive a call from an unknown number. There's never any caller ID, never any location. When I answer, I hear only static. And just before the call disconnects, there's always a voice. Quiet, distant, almost impossible to hear. But every time, it says the same thing. Ethan. The unsettling part is that my name isn't Ethan. Not even close. At the time, I worked part-time for a local outdoor recreation center. Most of the job involved maintaining trails, helping tourists, and occasionally assisting park rangers when someone got injured or wandered off a marked path. In 4 years, I had participated in several search operations. Most of them were simple. A lost hiker would panic, take a wrong turn, and eventually be found a few miles away. This story was different. It started on a cold October evening. A 16-year-old boy named Frederick had gone hiking alone in a heavily wooded area outside town. His parents expected him home before sunset. When he didn't return, they called the authorities. Around 8 o'clock that night, volunteers were requested to assist with the search. I was one of them. There were about 15 people in total, including rangers, police officers, and local volunteers. The weather conditions were terrible. Dense clouds covered the sky. There was no moonlight. The forest was so dark that our flashlights barely seemed to penetrate it. Before entering the woods, the lead ranger gathered everyone together. He showed us Frederick's photograph and reviewed the search area. Then he gave one instruction that seemed oddly specific. If you hear someone calling your name, do not answer unless you can see who is speaking. A few people laughed. The ranger didn't. He simply repeated the warning. Then we headed into the forest. At first, everything felt routine. Our group spread out in a line and slowly moved through the trees. Every few minutes, someone would call Frederick's name. The rest of us listened for a response. Hours passed. Nothing. Around midnight, our group reached a section of forest that felt unusually isolated. The trees were older there, taller. The undergrowth was thick enough that visibility dropped to only a few yards. I remember noticing how quiet everything had become. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the sound of boots crunching across leaves. At some point, I realized I could no longer see the others. Their flashlight beams had vanished behind the trees. I wasn't worried. We all carried radios. I reached for mine and checked in. No response. Only static. I tried again. More static. Assuming the terrain was interfering with the signal, I continued moving forward. A few minutes later, I heard someone call my name. Marcus. The voice came from somewhere ahead. It sounded distant. I immediately thought one of the volunteers had spotted something. Then I remembered the ranger's warning. I stopped. The voice came again. Marcus. This time it sounded closer. Close enough that I should have seen whoever was speaking. I scanned the trees with my flashlight. Nothing. No movement. No lights. No people. Just darkness. I decided not to answer. Instead, I began walking back toward the direction I thought the search team had gone. A few moments later, I heard the voice again. Only this time, something felt wrong. The tone, the rhythm, the way my name was pronounced. It sounded like someone trying to imitate a human voice, not someone actually speaking. The realization sent a chill through me. I started walking faster. The voice followed, always somewhere ahead, never behind, never beside me, ahead, as if it wanted me to keep moving deeper into the woods. Then another voice joined it, a different one. This time it sounded like my mother. I froze. My mother lived nearly 200 miles away. There was absolutely no possibility she could be there. Yet I would have sworn it was her voice. She sounded scared, desperate, calling for help. For a moment, every instinct told me to run toward her. Instead, I kept walking away. The voices continued for nearly 10 minutes. Then they suddenly stopped. The silence that followed felt even worse. I eventually found an old logging road and followed it until my radio finally crackled back to life. The search team directed me toward their position. When I reached them, several people looked visibly shaken. One volunteer had tears in her eyes. Another refused to speak at all. Eventually, the lead ranger asked a question. Did anyone answer the voices? Nobody did. At least that's what everyone claimed. The search continued until nearly 3 a.m. Then we found Frederick. Or at least we found where he had been. Deep in the woods, searchers discovered a small clearing. In the center was Frederick's backpack, his flashlight, his jacket, everything neatly arranged on the ground, as though someone had carefully placed them there. But Frederick himself was nowhere to be found. The discovery changed the atmosphere immediately. What had started as a rescue operation suddenly felt different. The police took over. The rest of us were instructed to leave the area. As we headed back toward the trailhead, I noticed one of the rangers speaking quietly with another volunteer. Their expressions were serious, concerned. I overheard part of the conversation. Apparently, this wasn't the first disappearance in that section of forest. Not even close. Several people had vanished there over the years. Most were eventually found. A few never were. The next morning, the search resumed. By noon, they located Frederick. He was alive. Barely. A helicopter transported him to a hospital. The official report stated that he had become disoriented and wandered away from the trail. That explanation satisfied most people, but not the volunteers who were there, because Frederick told investigators something strange, something that never appeared in the official report. One of the paramedics happened to be a friend of mine. A few days later, he told me what Frederick claimed happened. According to him, he got lost shortly before sunset. While searching for the trail, he heard people calling his name. At first, he thought it was rescuers. Then he realized something unsettling. The voices were coming from every direction at once. Not just one direction, every direction. The deeper he walked, the more voices he heard. Some belonged to strangers. Others belonged to family members, teachers, friends, people he knew, people he trusted. Eventually, he saw flashlights moving through the trees. Dozens of them. He started running toward them. But every time he got close, the lights moved farther away, leading him deeper into the forest. The last thing he remembered before being found was seeing someone standing between the trees, a person watching him, completely motionless. He thought it was a ranger, until the figure stepped into the light. According to Frederick, it had his face. Not a similar face. His face. The same clothes, the same haircut, the same voice. Standing there in the darkness, smiling. After that, he remembered nothing. The story spread quietly among locals. Most people dismissed it. Trauma can do strange things to the mind. Fear can distort memories. At least that's what everyone said. Frederick never publicly discussed the incident again. His family moved away less than a year later. I haven't seen him since. But 5 years after the search, I met one of the rangers who had been there that night. We started talking about old cases. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to Frederick. The ranger became unusually quiet. Then he told me something I had never heard before. The night Frederick disappeared, search teams had been using GPS trackers. Every volunteer carried one, including Frederick, after they found him. When investigators reviewed the tracking data, they discovered something impossible. For nearly 3 hours before Frederick was located, a second GPS signal had been moving through the forest, following the exact same route as Frederick. Every turn, every stop, every change of direction, the two paths matched perfectly, as though someone had been walking beside him the entire night. The strange part was that the second tracker didn't belong to anyone. No volunteer, no ranger, no police officer, no missing equipment, no explanation. Just an unidentified signal moving through the woods, keeping pace with Frederick until the moment he was found, then disappearing completely. The ranger told me the data was eventually dismissed as a technical error. Maybe it was. But I've never been able to stop thinking about one detail. If Frederick really saw someone with his own face standing among the trees, and if the GPS data was accurate, then whatever was following him wasn't merely watching from a distance. It had been walking right beside him the entire time, and nobody has ever figured out who or what was carrying that second signal. Every year, a group of friends and I plan at least one camping trip together. We've been doing it since high school. Even though life has pulled us in different directions, that tradition somehow survived. That summer, four of us decided to spend a weekend in a national forest in Northern California. The area wasn't particularly famous. In fact, that was part of the appeal. There were fewer tourists, fewer campsites, and miles of dense forest stretching in every direction. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The weather was perfect. Clear blue skies, warm temperatures, not a cloud in sight. We spent most of the day hiking before setting up camp near a small lake. By sunset, everything felt exactly the way a summer camping trip should feel. We cooked dinner, sat around the fire, shared stories, laughed about old memories. Nothing seemed unusual. Around 10 o'clock, one of my friends, Aaron, mentioned seeing an old fire observation tower during our hike earlier that day. Apparently, it stood on top of a nearby hill about a mile from camp. He joked that we should climb it at night. Most of us laughed off the idea. But after another hour around the fire, boredom started setting in. Eventually, the four of us grabbed flashlights and decided to check it out. The hike wasn't difficult. A narrow trail wound uphill through the trees. Crickets chirped from every direction. The air carried that familiar smell of pine and warm earth. About 20 minutes later, we saw the tower. It rose above the treetops like a giant silhouette against the stars. The structure looked old, very old. Its metal frame was rusted, and parts of the staircase appeared damaged. A faded warning sign hung near the base. Most of the lettering had worn away. Aaron immediately started climbing. The rest of us followed. The tower swayed slightly beneath our weight. Every step produced loud metallic creaks. By the time we reached the top platform, my hands were sweating. Not from exertion, from the height. The view, however, was incredible. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction. A dark ocean of trees beneath a sky full of stars. For several minutes, nobody spoke. We simply stood there, enjoying the view. Then Aaron pointed toward the horizon. "What's that?" At first, I didn't see it. Then I noticed a light. A small white light moving through the forest, far away, maybe several miles distant. It moved slowly between the trees. We assumed it was another camper. Then a second light appeared, and a third, and a fourth. Within a minute, there were dozens. Tiny white lights drifting through the darkness. None followed trails. None moved in straight lines. They wandered randomly through the forest, almost like people searching for something. "That's weird," one of my friends said. Nobody disagreed. We watched them for several minutes, then something stranger happened. The lights suddenly stopped moving, every single one, as if someone had given a silent command. The entire forest became motionless. Then, one by one, the lights began turning toward the tower, toward us. I know how ridiculous that sounds, but all four of us noticed it. The lights weren't scattered anymore. They seemed aligned, facing our direction, watching. An uncomfortable silence settled over the platform. Eventually, Aaron laughed nervously and suggested we head back. Nobody argued. We started descending immediately. About halfway down, I glanced back toward the forest. The lights were moving again. This time they were coming closer, much closer. The hike back to camp felt completely different. The same trail that had seemed harmless earlier now felt unsettling. Every shadow looked deeper. Every sound seemed amplified. Nobody talked much. We all wanted to return to camp, fast. About 10 minutes later, we reached the lake. The fire was still burning. Our tents remained untouched. Everything appeared normal. The tension gradually faded. We convinced ourselves the lights had probably belonged to other campers, maybe search teams, maybe hikers, maybe anything except what our imaginations had suggested. Then Aaron noticed something. There were footprints near the edge of camp. Fresh footprints, dozens of them. At first, we assumed another group had wandered through. But after closer inspection, something felt wrong. The footprints completely surrounded our campsite. They formed a rough circle around the tents, as though a crowd of people had stood there watching. The strange part was that none of the tracks entered the camp itself. They stopped at the edge, circled the area, and then disappeared back into the woods. Nobody slept particularly well that night. The next morning, we decided to leave early. As we packed our gear, Aaron realized his backpack was missing. We searched everywhere. Nothing. Eventually, we assumed it had been stolen. Frustrated but eager to leave, we loaded our vehicles and drove home. The story probably would have ended there. Except Aaron got his backpack back. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at his apartment. No return address, no shipping information, nothing. Inside was the missing backpack. Every item remained exactly where it had been. His wallet, his flashlight, his keys, everything. Except for one thing. There was a photograph. A photograph none of us had ever seen before. The image showed the observation tower, taken at night, taken from a distance. The quality was poor, but the tower was clearly visible, and so were 4 figures standing on the top platform. Us. The problem was the angle. The photo had been taken from somewhere high above the tower, higher than the observation deck itself, as though the photographer had been looking down on us. The Forest Service later confirmed there were no taller structures anywhere nearby. No cliffs, no mountains, nothing. Just trees. Aaron threw the photograph away. At least that's what he claims. A few months later, one of our friends contacted the local Forest Service out of curiosity. He wanted to know if anyone maintained the old tower. The employee he spoke to became confused. According to official records, the tower had been demolished nearly 15 years earlier. There shouldn't have been a tower there at all. The worker even emailed photographs showing the site. The hilltop was empty. Nothing remained except a concrete foundation. At first, we assumed it was some kind of mistake. Then Aaron remembered something. The faded warning sign near the staircase. While looking through photos from the trip, he found a blurry image of it in the background. After enhancing the picture, we could finally read part of the text. Most of the sign was still illegible, but one sentence remained visible. Just 5 words. Do not remain after sunset. None of us have returned to that forest, and none of us can explain the photograph. But there's one detail that bothers me more than anything else. Years later, I can still remember looking out from the tower and seeing those lights moving through the trees. At the time, I thought they were approaching us. Now, I'm not so sure. Because the more I think about it, the more it feels like they weren't heading toward the tower at all. It felt like they were gathering beneath it, waiting. And if the tower truly hadn't existed for 15 years, then whatever was standing below us that night may not have been looking up at 4 campers. It may have been looking up at something else standing on that platform with us, something none of us ever noticed.